Who are the most overrated characters in Smash history? If there's one thing I can promise you when eventual Smash 6 comes along, during the first month or two after the game's release, people will promise you that Ganon is probably at least mid-tier this time, and that character with that really easy combo that does too much damage, they're broken. And Ness is like really good this time. He's probably top 10. In all seriousness though, the meta for competitive Smash Bros games changed so much, so fast, especially during the early days of a new game's release, and I promise you that'll happen again in Smash 6. So I thought it'd be fun to take a look back at some of the examples of characters who seemed very strong early into a game's life, but the opinions of them just seemed to get lower and lower as the game was developed. So let's take a look at all the games in Smash's history and see which characters have trended downwards over the game's life. Now, if you've watched my last few videos, you'll know that I've been tackling these questions using numbers alone. Every Smash game has had quote-unquote official community tier lists which rank how good characters are in competitive tournaments. Sometimes they are voted on by the best players or a massive amount of collective opinions and whatnot. That being said, for this video, I will be referencing these lists and considering them, but it'll also be much more opinionated, as some of what was talked about early into Smash's history has not been recorded, as the tier list came later. Some of the games have been patched as well, so we can't just compare how good a character was really early into the life compared to how they are now, because you know they might have just got nerfed. So especially for a game like Smash 4 and Ultimate, I'll be bringing up some prominent examples that I personally remembered being talked about as characters who are clearly strong, but they turned out to be a little overrated as people figured out their weaknesses or the strengths of the characters around them that became much more prominent. So anyway, let's begin with the game that started this beautiful franchise, Super Smash Bros 64, which came out in January of 1999. Unfortunately, I was really young during this time, so it's safe to say I have no memory of how strong people thought each character was. Plus, the internet was nowhere near as big as it is now, so chances are most people thought the best characters were the ones your siblings or neighbors were beating you with. For me, I'm still convinced to this day that Link was just the best. So the first tier list we have here listed is from March 11, 2008 and is from the Game FAQs community. This kind of sounds like a meme, but I actually remember growing up with Game FAQs being the kind of go-to place for a lot of discourse around most games I was invested in. I remember spending a lot of time there in 2005 and 2006 myself, trying to become the best Mario Strikers Charged player on the planet, which, by the way, is still the greatest esports game to ever grace this earth. It was just ahead of its time. But maybe that's for another video. Anyway, as we can see on this tier list, the main standout is Ness. He's number 3 on this tier list, and immediately 1 year later, a bit over a year later, he drops down to 8. And if we go all the way down to the current tier list, he's at 10th, the third worst. So we went from third best to third worst over the course of these tier lists. Smash 64 obviously has a very limited roster, and it looks like some of the characters actually stood in place for most of its life. Pikachu and Kirby were just clearly the best characters, except when Fox slipped in a little bit. What happened there? Fox and Falcon were always just seen as good. Mario was kind of behind them, up and down. Yoshi was okay too. Not that much crazy movement besides our boy Ness, who went from 3rd to 10th. I tried doing a bit of research as to what happened here, and there were pretty much 2 things that stood out to me. Some people mentioned that the tier lists were generally just not agreed upon as much as you would see today, and things were more speculative, leading to Ness getting overrated by some, and many people didn't even agree with this list back in the day. Another thing people mention is that the stage lists might have changed during the time. Some people mention that Hyrule Castle was legal for a very long time, and some communities around the world still gentlemen to it to this day. I've seen some Smash 64 players tell me that although Ness is probably still bad regardless, having Hyrule legal gave him a stage that helped him out in terms of covering for his biggest weakness, which was his recovery. So some people may have had a better opinion on him. On the other hand, I've also had other 64 players tell me that Ness is probably better on Dreamland anyway, so it was just people being wrong. So yeah, not much to say here for Smash 64. Our clear winner, or I guess loser, of biggest fall from grace for Smash 64 is Ness. This one does feel a little cheap. Who knows what was being discussed back in the day on Game FAQs, and his fall seemed to be extremely quick, as the following year when most people were on Smash boards, he had already fell from 3rd to 8th. So anyway, let's move on to Super Smash Bros. Melee. Melee gives us a little more data right off the bat. The game came out in 2001, and we have a tier list from 2002 that the community in Smash boards came up with back in the day. As you can see here, October 8th, 2002, and the MBR guys have all given our personal view of tiers. Honestly, I couldn't even tell you what MBR was. Sounds kind of official to me though. And just to let you guys know that this wasn't a random bunch of people. We have Mewtwo King 2002. I agree for the most part. Mewtwo King's seal of approval, but he does not agree with where Mewtwo was. He could be easily at the top if people unlocked his full potential. It has not been unlocked to this day, Mewtwo King. But yeah, Mewtwo himself was ranked a dead last. Although I was still too young to be competing at this time, I do have some memories of the discussions of Melee characters back in the day, and one character who stuck out to me right away when thinking of this video was Sheik. Although she's still quite obviously still an amazing character to this day. As we can see here, after many and many tier lists, she's still rank 5, which is really good. And yeah, there's a lot of tier lists in between these. But she was the kind of undisputed rank 1 at this time. And to me, that's a pretty big fall off, even though it's only, 4 spots. I remember hearing about how Sheik was some kind of absolute demon. I swear, I remember people talking about her the way I hear Steve talked about today. Fox and Falco were good too, the same way people say, Sonic and Game & Watch are pretty good too. But I swear I heard so much about Sheik. Anyway, she's obviously still very relevant to this day. But as I said, it's only a 4 spot drop off. But to me, I think the degree into how strong the characters under her have climbed up and how dominant the other characters are now in Melee's history kind of lands her as a good candidate as someone who was overrated early into Melee's history. So many other characters have had very dominant periods of being rank 1, I mean especially Fox, or a rank 1 player piloting them for a long period of time like Jigs and Marth, that I think Sheik has fallen off quite a bit. Again, she's 5th, which is still great, but being like the undisputed first to losing that much relevancy to me is quite a big overreaction. If I had to guess on why she was seen as so strong, and feel free to leave some comments on this if you were around back then, I'd love to get some more insights, but I think her strengths are just significantly more simple and easy to understand very early into the game's life. And I don't want to say that Sheik hasn't been pushed further and new tech and strategies haven't been developed in the last 20 years. Those things have definitely happened and continue to happen, but she started off with kind of a great neutral, easy to understand combo game and throw game, and although other characters have matched and surpassed her in these aspects, it took a lot more discoveries and nuance to get to that point. That being said, Sheik is obviously still really strong, but I think it's fair to say that she was quite overrated. So if we look at this tier list again, the next 2 characters that are quite clearly too high to me are Mario at 5th and Zelda at 6th. So I'm pretty sure that the reasoning for Zelda is as simple as people believe that she had one of the best moves in the game, which was pressing down B and turning into the character that everyone thought was the best in the game, Sheik. When doing some research, I have seen that some people say that Zelda herself was probably seen as a bit stronger than she is now, because before everyone was so good at movement, people were still missing L canceling, and the general tech that developed throughout the game's life just wasn't there yet, that Zelda could actually compete a little bit better. But looking at this thread itself that I was just talking about, if we scroll down and take a look here, it's mentioned also something Gilgy forgot to mention. The score for Zelda is debatable, as many people put Sheik with Zelda when making their tier list. Zelda would probably be ranked a bit lower overall. That being said, they said a bit lower, so I feel like people probably did have like a decent outlook on her, right? It's not like people are saying Zelda is so trash, why is she up there? Just, some people mix them up, she's a little too high. And again, Michu King agreed for the most part. But either way, going from 6th all the way down to 24th, and as we can see, it was kind of a slow ride, right? She didn't just fall straight to the bottom. It was kind of an overtime thing, so I do think that people probably thought Zelda herself was just better than she is, right? 17th even here, down the middle of the way. But now being ranked as the 3rd worst character, she's obviously had a huge fall off and was quite overrated. Mario, on the other hand, as we mentioned, he was 5th up here. And now he sits at 15th, which isn't the biggest fall off ever, but it is a pretty big difference, right? Especially like people love to say top 5. Being top 5 just sounds cool. And now he's all the way down here with Ganon. Being next to Ganon in any Smash game probably means you're overrated if people thought you were good, right? Sorry, Ganon. Funny enough, he's kind of swapped spots with Captain Falcon. He went from 5th to 15th, and Falcon went from 16th, I think, to 6th. So when looking into why Mario fell off, and this is something we're going to hear a lot throughout this video, is that people kind of just understood how Mario worked a little earlier. He's a jack of all trade. He hit pretty hard. He had a good combo game, a good grab game. So he seemed like he was much stronger before all these other characters had to develop way more tech to catch up. It's hard to say for sure, but again, if you played Melee competitively back in the day, I would love to hear from you in the comments. That being said, Mario went from 5th to 16th, so he was quite overrated. All right, so let's move on to Super Smash Bros. Brawl. This game has a very special place in my heart, as it's the first game that I want to get really good at, even though I was still young and mashing the C-stick too much, but hey, I did want to, okay? I just don't know how hard I tried. So the obvious standouts by just looking at this tier list here is King DDD is ranked 3rd and Game & Watch is ranked 4th. If we go all the way down to the later ends of the game's life, Game & Watch fell down to 16th and DDD fell down to 12th. Not the biggest fall-offs ever, but being in that, illustrious top 5 and then falling straight out of there, especially Game & Watch, who fell quite a bit. And DDD, as I mentioned in my last video, which you should check out if you haven't, was kind of trending down towards the game's entire life, right? He went 12, 11, 10, like it's such a perfect fall off. 8, oh, he skipped 9, 6, 4, like this guy's just right like a slide. He just went all the way down. I actually remember playing Game & Watch as a kid. As I mentioned, I loved mashing on the C-stick, and Game & Watch kind of rewarded you for that. Maybe I should try to pick him up in this game too. Let's see what happens. But I kind of felt like I sold my soul because I had no interest in the character himself, so I ended up switching to Snake, who was both better and I actually liked him as a character. Anyway, Game & Watch and DDD both had similar trajectories. Game & Watch went from 4th to 16th, and DDD started off as 3rd down to 12th, as we mentioned. Again, in my last video, I talked about how DDD's strengths were kind of really obvious right out the gate. He had a really good back air. You could literally just press it for half the game. He had multiple jumps. He was good in the air. He didn't really worry about tripping. He was hard to edge guard. He had a very, very strong chain grab that, I could teach you in 0.5 seconds how to do. And he was heavy, so people who weren't optimizing their characters yet would take forever to kill you. It just made you feel like you were just a powerhouse if you picked DDD early into Brawl. I went to talk to some Brawl vets, and one Brawl player, Meek Speedy, also brought up a great point to me when considering old Brawl tier lists. There are two major things that may affect how a character ranked on tier lists as the time went on in Brawl. The first is the stage list. I highly suggest you check out this video from Brawl Alternative on the unorthodox legal stages in Brawl. There was actually so many crazy stages that people used to play on. I'm not even like trying to clickbait you when I say the shit people played on in this game. And this could benefit some characters. As we see here, this stage was actually legal. So characters like DDD could just chain grab you all the way up the stage and kill you. This wasn't specific to that stage either. Even in this corner of Rainbow Cruise, DDD can essentially infinitely chain grab you as you got hit on the wall. A lot of other stages had walls as well. So as the stage does kind of taper down to what we're more used to these days, I mean, it never really did, I think, but it got closer. So a character like DDD who had some really strong tools on some of these weird stages, he technically was getting nerfed as he lost access to those stages, right? The second major consideration that was mentioned to me is as the game went on, no meme how good your character did into Meta Knight was a very, very prominent factor in that character's placing on a tier list. If I said that today about a character like Steve, you could kind of laugh it off because like it's a bit of an over exaggeration, right? Steve is obviously a very strong character, but you're going to run into so many other characters throughout a Smash bracket. You can quite literally win a tournament without ever fighting Steve. That is not the case with Meta Knight. Every good player and their mother either played Meta Knight or had a pocket Meta Knight. You would run into him. If you went to round 3 of a tournament and you didn't run into Meta Knight, probably got a nice bracket. From what I was told, DDD actually had a really bad matchup into Meta Knight. He was one of the characters who was seen as really good early, who seemed to struggle fighting Meta Knight way more than some of the other characters who ended up being top tier. That being said, most characters lost to Meta Knight, so it's not about can you beat Meta Knight, it's like don't lose by too much, and as far as I heard, DDD was losing by quite a bit. This kind of applies to Game & Watch as well. From what I could find out, most people did think that he was pretty bad into Meta Knight, not quite as bad as DDD, but he was still pretty bad. People also mentioned that Game & Watch had very bad matchups into other characters that ended up being more popular, like Ice Climbers and Diddy. Another thing that was mentioned to me by Meek was that as people got better at the game, SDI became much more prevalent. And if you play Smash 4 Ultimate, you probably know what SDI is, but in older games, it was much more prevalent. Like you could teleport if you SDI'd correctly. So for a character like Game & Watch, who often used moves like his back air and his nair, and those moves were getting him so much mileage early into the game's life, they became less and less useful as they were long multi-hits and people learned how to SDI out of them. So the other standouts here are Rob at 6th, DK at 10th, and Zelda at 20th. If we go all the way down, Rob went from 6th to 18th, which is a pretty big fall off, nothing crazy. DK went from 10th to 21st, again, pretty big, but not like the end of the world. And Zelda went from 20th down to cuddling with the Triforce Bros. And you know, I guess Jigglypuff came along for the ride as being one of the worst characters in the game. I don't want to spend too long on these, mostly because there's much less conversation about them that I could find, and a lot of what I've been told seems to match up well for these characters as well. Struggling against Meta Knight really hurts you in the long term. Rob felt quite easy to use early into the game as he had a really strong neutral, but characters around him ended up developing much more and having stronger punish games. And honestly, I can't find anything about Zelda. If I had to guess, just like last time, maybe some people were just pressing down B and considering that to be one of Zelda's strengths. That being said, the funny part is that Sheik wasn't even considered good for most of the game's life. I mean, even by the end, she's not, but Zelda was considered better than Sheik early into Brawl's life, which is insane. As we go down, that's not the case. So Sheik is still not very good, 25th, but Zelda is one of the worst in the game. Okay, so let's move on to Smash 4, and this is where things get a little weird because we're entering the age of balance patches. It's not as useful to just look at old tier lists and compare them to new ones at a glance because so much of these games have changed. So I will be going off of my memory and just having more opinions on my end. Feel free to disagree with me, especially if you're actually playing the game at the time. Let me know what you think were some of the more overrated characters. And we actually have another issue with Smash 4 here. As we can see, the first tier list here is February 1st, 2016. The Wii U version of Smash 4 came out in November of 2014. So this was, you know, over a year and a half, almost 2 years later. At this point, we already had DLC. As you can see, Cloud's here at 12th for some reason. And there was already patches. You know, everyone knows that Diddy Kong was one of the best characters in the game for a long period, but here he is at 9th, right? He was already nerfed. But either way, as I said, I'm going to be using these as well as my own memory. And the first character I want to talk about, which is off my own memory for the most part, is Ness. As we can see here, he's 13th, which, spoiler, is way higher than he ends up. But I also remember very clearly people talked about this character as if he was like really strong. As we can see here in ESAM's 1.10 Smash 4 tier list, which I think is the second big patch of Smash, or maybe the second, yeah, I don't remember, but it's early into the game's life. ESAM was one of the best players in early Smash 4. For most of Smash 4, he had Sheik as the best character in the game, Pikachu as number 2, Luigi, Fox, these are all characters that you probably heard about, Rosalina, and then we have Ness. We had a what, 6th, 5th, 7th? I wasn't even counting, let's be honest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sixth best character. This isn't like a random Redditor opinion that slowly got drained out to bring him down to 13th. He was rated as pretty high. In my opinion, he was super overrated throughout most of the game's life. And I think that's the case with a lot of games. It's already happened in Smash 64. Spoiler, I think it happens a little bit in Ultimate as well. And it's going to happen in Smash 6, I promise you. As we can see, he falls down all the way to 28th, which is quite a big drop off. Not only is it just a big number, but he went from, you know, one of the contenders at the top to, I'm not going to say he was like bad by any means, but at this point in Smash 4, characters that are trending towards, you know, the D and E tier are not too threatening to win tournaments or anything along the lines. So I do think he was quite overrated. This is a character who kind of usually has good aerials. He has really good throws. He can be annoying to fight. So I think a lot of people struggle against him way more early into a game's life. But as the game goes on and people get better at keeping him out and edge guarding him, I think people's opinion of him tends to trend downwards. I also think in this game, the characters who ended up becoming really strong also just did really good into him. I don't remember his matchup spread to a T by any means, but characters like Cloud, Diddy, Mewtwo, Marth, Sheik were all so popular. And I can imagine it being really hard for Ness to play neutral against some of these characters. That being said, he was already bad into like Rosalina and Sheik, who were popular into the game's life. So I just think he was overrated in general. He did apparently do very good into Pikachu. So maybe that's a little ESEM's bias. I think he did good into Pikachu at least. At least that was what people thought early into the game. But another character who I actually think fits this bill is Yoshi. As we can see here, rank 15th, very early into the game's list. I don't think he got nerfed. And he falls all the way down to 33rd. Again, pretty big fall off, being from one of the, you know, the more threatening characters to kind of on the bottom tier where people stop really caring about you. I honestly think he's very similar to Ness. And then Yoshi's a character who people find to be pretty good early into a game's life and then seems to fall off, except in Melee where he had the opposite trajectory, I guess. He's usually pretty easy to pick up. He has very good tools, you know, quick nair, double jump, super armor. Kind of hits pretty hard for a character that moves that fast. So I think he gets very overrated, but as people get better at interacting against him, just like Ness, they keep him out better, they keep him in disadvantage much longer. I think the opinion of these characters goes down over time. Another character we have that I think was quite overrated is Villager, who's here at 11th. As we can see here, if we go all the way back down, he falls all the way down to 25th. You know, I think he was still a relevant character, but the opinion of him went down a lot. Honestly, I don't think the opinion of him was that high when the game released. I do think a lot of it was carried by Renai. As soon as Renai ended up doing really good in tournaments, people's opinion of Villager kind of followed with that. I think he also had a case of some bad matchups plague him as the game's life went on. A lot of DLC characters like Cloud, who was extremely popular, kind of destroyed him, and he generally had a hard time against many of the top tiers. But yeah, going from 11th all the way to 25th is quite the fall off. So I would say, in my opinion, even just the way people used to talk about him, I thought he was pretty overrated even back in the day. This one is a weird one though, because it's hard to say, right? I do think some of it was just Renai stopped playing more towards the end of the game, and characters who did well into Villager got introduced. You can't really say a character was overrated if like an actual meaningful reason they got worse is that new characters were added that like made that character struggle. So it's hard to say with this one, but in my opinion, I do think he was a bit overrated nonetheless. Another character early into Smash 4, which was seen as too good in my opinion, was Wario. Now, 21 is not that good, but in my opinion, Wario is a dog shit character in Super Smash Bros. 4 or the Wii U and 3DS. As you can see here, he falls all the way down to 35th. Quite the fall off. Again, not massive. He went from like, oh, maybe mid to like, oh, he's kind of shit. But yeah, I do think he was a little overrated early into the game's life. He was pretty good in Brawl, so I think people tend to think characters that they played in the last game are probably better than they are. That's something we'll see with Ultimate as well. Spoiler. The thing about Wario though is why I think it's like an extra big overreaction is that if we look at Wario's patch changes in Smash 4, which start right here, update history, they're all green. This guy literally just got buffed for the most part, except vectoring, which was kind of like a bug, I guess. So they were going to take that out no matter what. Even though he was being buffed, his tier lists were just getting lower, 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 lower. So I do think he was pretty overrated throughout the game's life. Now, just my personal opinion, maybe these are hot takes, I don't really know. The character who I actually thought was the most overrated by the end of Smash 4's life is Marth. As we can see here, Marth started off bad, and it wasn't that he just popped up out of nowhere. He got buffed, so he was obviously like, he became better than 41st in my opinion, and you know, everyone's opinion. But as you can see here, he's up here at 11th, better than Ryu, up there with, you know, Mewtwo, same tier as like, you know, these characters that were absolute fucking demons. Now, again, a little spoiler for the next part, but I do think there's a certain someone who picks up characters and people tend to rate them extremely high as soon as he does well with them. Who knows though, maybe he got even better if more people picked him up, and if we were still playing Smash 4, thank God we're not, let's be honest. But just my opinion, I don't think he was up here with some of these characters. I think some of the characters around here were absolute demons, where he was like a good character for sure, but I don't think he was anything crazy. And yeah, that's about it. A special mention to our boy Roberto, who started off at 20th, and I remember people thinking he was not bad. But yeah, 35th, he kind of, you know, you comboed him for free, blah, blah, blah. He wasn't what he was today in Smash Ultimate. Okay, and last but not least, we are on to Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. And with this, we have the same issue as we had with Smash 4. The game received a lot of balance patches and even more DLC characters were added. And for some godforsaken reason, the first tier list we have is 2023, okay? For reference, Smash Ultimate came out in 2018, okay? So I don't know why it took half a decade for us to get an official tier list, but you know, there we are. So again, I'm going to be talking about some of my own memories of early Smash Ultimate. Maybe we'll try to find some tier lists from other sources, but yeah, let's get into it. So one thing I want to stress about this video is kind of the point I mentioned early. When Smash 6 comes out, there will be some terrible dog shit tier lists in the first month. And if you don't believe me, I found the first official r/Smash Bros Ultimate tier list results. Okay, I'm going to show you this. This are people voting on how strong the characters were in the first months of the game's release, and it's disgusting. Okay, so if I'm just gonna look at this and talk about it. Okay, one, Pikachu is a good candidate for a character who's just pretty overrated in Smash Ultimate. If we look at Pikachu now, he sits at 17th, which is obviously not bad, but people were talking about Pikachu, like you can see here, like in his own tier, and that's clearly just not the case. If I remember correctly, Pikachu was literally only buffed throughout Smash Ultimate's life as well. Yeah, so Thunder Jolt did a little less shield damage, but you know, they got better pummel. Stand and grab was bigger, which is huge, a bigger shield. Like, nothing too crazy, but like literally just got better and went from the undisputed best character, I mean it was disputed, I shouldn't say that, to, you know, like a good character, but not nearly as threatening at the top level. The character who I think probably wins the award for the most overrated character in Smash Ultimate history is Inkling, as we could see right here. Rank number 2, and I was around early into Smash Ultimate. People talked about this character as if they were an absolute demon, but as we can see here, they sit at a 49th place today. That's disgusting. Going from here to here. Marth is another clear example of a character who was just so overrated. I think I mentioned this earlier. Characters who are good in Smash 4, people probably were trying them out. They had good opinions of them, especially, you know, Marth, he's pretty simple. He's not simple in that, like, you can just win with him, but you know what you're going to do with him, right? You're going to space your tippers. You're going to play the game at this range. So maybe some people thought, you know, he was pretty good. I think Lucina probably was a little overrated as well, but she actually got nerfed and she was actually pretty good. So it's like way less offensive. And Marth, he's bad. He's bad. We could see him today at 55th place. We might as well talk about Chrom, who's right beside him. We go back here. You know, Chrom's only here at the end of high tier, but I promise you, some people talked about this character like he was top 5, God's gift to this earth character. He was fast, he hit hard, he did a lot of damage. I specifically remember that there was an invitational that Tweak won, I think he won, but he's playing Chrom and he did like the nair up B suicide thing. I don't remember, but so many people were talking about how broken this character was, and it's just not the case. He's worse and worse and worse despite not really getting nerfed. Roy, on the other hand, even though we already see that Roy is seen to be a bit better than Chrom, I do remember people having this discussion and a lot of people saying Chrom was better. I don't remember why, but I promise you that was a discussion that was held early into Smash Ult's life. Also, characters that are just overrated, as I mentioned, were pretty much every character who was good in Smash 4. Not all of them, but funny enough, one of the characters who was the least overrated, Sonic, ended up being amazing, while Cloud, Mewtwo, Sheik, Diddy, Meta Knight, and Ryu were all characters who were really good in Smash 4, and they were buffed so many times throughout Ultimate, and almost none of them are this good to this day. I mean, Diddy and Cloud are close to where we see them here if we look at the current tier list. If we look at the current tier list, you know, Diddy and Cloud are up there as well, you know, 9th and 13th, which is like similar to where people had them early. So, you know, you could say, oh, they're not that overrated. These characters got Omega buffed throughout Smash Ultimate's life, and then they ended up here. So I think they were super overrated at first. Sheik, Mewtwo, Meta Knight, and Ryu were all Giga buffed, and none of them are even this close to this day. So I think these characters were all pretty overrated. And then we have the elephants in the room. I'm sure you're staring them down already. Simon, Richter, and King K. Rool. What the fuck are they doing up here, man? Now, I actually remember all of these characters being talked about highly. I specifically remember a lot of people trying K. Rool. Like, I went to a Smash Fest like 1 week into the game. There were some of the people who were really good at Smash 4 in my area trying out K. Rool seriously, like debating if they should play him. And then when it came to Simon and Richter, I remember Riddles was picking them up. Riddles, you know, came to be a top 10 player in Ultimate playing this dog shit character. I actually have a funny anecdote when it came to Simon and Richter. I went to a tournament pretty early into Ult's life where I got to play Riddles in like winter semis or quarters or something. And I was convinced these characters were already overrated, but I knew Riddles was a good player. He was so much on the up and up throughout the end of Smash 4. So I thought, you know, even though I think his character's overrated, I'm pretty sure this is going to be a little tough. And I was playing Snake and Pichu at the time. In my head, I thought that Snake might have a hard time, but Pichu must destroy these characters. And if we look at in hindsight, Pichu was probably way higher than this and Simon and Richter were way lower. And I promise you Pichu did destroy Simon Richter. But I fucking lost to Riddles. It was 3-2 though, I actually remember. And or maybe 2-1. I don't remember if it was best of 5. But it went to game 3. And I left thinking that, wow, that character is ass. Riddles is so good though. Like I actually remember having this thought. I'm not even joking. And yeah, it turned out they're pretty shit. Anyway, back on track. All 3 of these characters where people were trying them out. People literally thought they would be good. And let's take a look. They actually, most of them got buffed. K-Rool is currently the 3rd worst character in the game. Simon and Richter are in the bottom 10. If you look at K-Rool, some people will kind of meme that he got nerfed really early into the game, which he did. I mean, he did get nerfed early into the game's life, but they weren't a huge deal. And if we pass these nerfs, he got a whole shit ton of buffs throughout the rest of the game's life. Like, look at this. This is green. This is greener than my bank account. Like, what the... And yeah, even with all these buffs alongside, you know, 1 or 2 nerfs early into the game's life, he sits as the 3rd worst character in the game. He's a very, very big contender for being the most overrated character in Smash history. I would say probably bigger than Inkling. At least Inkling is still like okay. People think, you know, maybe... I've heard even to this day, very top players say maybe there's still some potential there, but no one's playing. I don't know. But no one has any faith in K-Rool. I actually don't think he's this bad to this day, but yeah, he's definitely nowhere near this. And yeah, to be honest, Simon and Richter follows through right beside him. They're both way too high here and they fell very fast. So if we go just 1 month forward where people have been watching more tournaments, we see that this was kind of correcting itself very fast. But this is 2 months into the game, which doesn't sound like a lot of time. But when a new game releases, every single day, people are just playing the shit out of it, talking about it so much. So for it to take 2 months for some of these corrections to happen is pretty long, I think. Simon and Richter are still seen as pretty mid-tier, right? Still overrated. King K-Rool falling down, but you know, he's still not the worst. People still think Inkling is really good. Pikachu is really good, although people are not saying that they are like the best 2 in the game anymore. But again, we see that they are up. Pichu's stocks went way up when kind of Void was showing off. And I didn't mean to highlight Link here. I just wrote Ink for Inkling. But Link's another character I thought was super overrated early into Smash Ultimate's life. He's seen as a high tier here. A lot of people were talking about him as if he was a good character. And as we see, now he's at 55th, kind of sad. And he got a lot of buffs. So like getting buffed while going down is a telltale that he was probably pretty overrated. Another standout for the first tier list is Isabel, who's, you know, bottom of the barrel right now. Not much to say. Down here at 69th XD. Not much to say. Very similar trajectory to Simon, Richter, and K-Rool. People thought she was okay. Not the case. Another character I want to mention quickly is Shulk. I think if you ask someone who's the most overrated character in Smash Ultimate even, people will probably say Shulk and Pikachu. I think that's like a very common opinion, but I don't think Shulk was ever rated that highly. Now, people always talk about Shulk could be good. I'm like, if I had a dime for every time someone said Shulk has potential, I wouldn't have to edit my own videos. I'd be pumping these things out. But that being said, I don't think people often actually rated him that highly. Like, he was usually in the high tiers. I think to this day he still is. Maybe you could say he's still overrated. I don't know if you want to like have that argument. He's 25th, nothing crazy. But a lot of people will tell you that Shulk and Pikachu are like overrated characters. It's kind of funny because although people will still say that about Pikachu, I'm actually going to search it up right now. Okay, first link I found, most overrated character in Super Smash Bros. Any character that gets a big upset. I mean, that's kind of true. Shulk, boom, second one. He's gonna have so much untapped potential in Smash. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, this guy gets it. Anyone with one top level rep who becomes top tier, yeah. Byleth back in the day with Leo, as I was talking about. Now it's Cloud. I mean, okay, maybe people think that. I always think that without Spargo, basically no one would put Cloud in the top 15. Maybe. Overrated Pikachu, all hype, 0 results. Overhyped Falcon. See, now people are still saying Pikachu and Shulk, but I don't think these characters are highly rated. I actually think Pikachu is like gone full circle. He might be underrated. 17th is pretty low relative to like, I'm gonna use the fucking word, the potential that Pikachu has. If you watch Shiny Mark, you can see that this character can do so well into so many good characters. So yeah, maybe Pikachu in full circle. Everyone says he's so overrated, but he's 17th now. Overrated in terms of how good they are, I'd honestly say it's Pikachu, not as much as before. There we go. Byleth, again, the Leo thing we talked about. It used to be Joker for sure. So yeah, Joker and Aegis are a character I wanted to talk about. Some people were mentioning Aegis as I think she's outside of top 5, still top 10, but not top 5. Again, this doesn't seem like a huge deal, but I actually do agree that both Joker and Aegis might have been a little overrated. I mentioned this earlier into the video, but going from like one of the best characters ever to not in that conversation anymore, to me is a very big drop off. It's not a huge in number, right? Second and third to what is it now? 5th and 10th is not huge, especially Aegis 5th, like okay, big deal. That's not a fall off, but they were talked about, like all 3 of these characters were talked about as if they were the best characters in the game, bar none, like in their own tier. You know, they're in the dark red S plus, not, you know, like the poo red or brown S. What the fuck did I just say? especially Joker, who's at 10th now, and you might say Joker got nerfed. These are way after Joker's nerfs with the down guns and whatnot. You know, this is 13.01. Aegis was already nerfed on this patch as well. I think her like F smash got a little worse and something, I don't know. But yeah, these characters went from like in the conversation for best in the game to probably not in that conversation anymore, but still very strong, especially Joker. I mean, Aegis is 5th, like who cares? But I thought they were worth mentioning as well. In terms of the most overrated character in Ultimate overall, I think if I could find some more evidence of people rating King K. Rool very high, I might give him the crown. But it's kind of hard to take the general opinions of Reddit too seriously. But I do think a lot of people, including myself, thought he was at least okay. Again, Pikachu and Inkling were pretty overrated. Inkling especially, but I do think K. Rool and Simon and Richter kind of had a way bigger fall off in terms of their perception. I remember people talking about these characters as probably being pretty good, and that just was not the case. Whereas I do think that Pikachu is still fine. Okay, Inkling's probably up there too, gets a silver or bronze medal. And we give a quick honorable mention to Donkey Kong and Ness. They're kind of up there in the high tier. They fall down over time. This has happened in other games, and I think it will happen again in Smash 6. I promise you Ness and Donkey Kong are going to be pretty good early into the game. Either way, I would love to hear all your opinions about these Smash games, whether it's about current day Ultimate, who's overrated right now, or early Ultimate in Smash 4, or any of the games you played and you have fond memories about people overhyping a character. Let me know in the comments below. I really am interested to get some more perspectives. That being said, if you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate if you liked and subscribed, as it helps me out a ton. And that's it for the video. Thanks for watching, everyone, and stay beautiful, my friends. I'll see you in the next one.